Hi, I'm Deanna Springer with a fun Stitch It Sisters quilting project. First, we'll introduce our Stitch It Sisters guest, Jill Repp. You may know Jill as the host of many June Tailor project inspiration videos. Welcome back to Stitch It Sisters, Jill.
Thanks, Deanna. It's great to see you again and everybody at Team NZP. We're going to mix it up today a little bit with this new quilt design.
Let's take a closer look at the quilt we're making today. We'll be stitching our Quilt As You Go Mix and Match 12 block quilt with Sew Bloom Fabrics by Cherry Blossom Studio for Benartex, June Tailor's Magic Seam Wand, Glue Stick, Quilter's Starch Savvy, and Basting Spray, Schmet's Chrome Quilting Needles size 90, Clover's 3/4 inch bias tape maker, a 1/4 inch quilting presser foot, open toe presser foot, and our Bernina B770 sewing machine. Before making our Quilt As You Go Mix and Match 12 block quilt, let's review what's in the package.
Each of the kits contain 4 pieces of printed batting, so your pattern is printed right on the batting. And each of the 4 sheets has 3 different patterns on it. So what we did today is we used all 12 to make our quilt, but you could use 1 block individually to make a pillow. You could combine 3 of the blocks to make a table runner. That's why we call it mix and match. The blocks can be turned once you've got them sewn. There's so many options with this kit, but you will get 4 each of these 3 block styles.
And that's what's included in the package. So you're the designer, you choose your fabrics, and you'll want to add binding and Sash-In-A-Dash in the colors of your choosing. We've selected Sew Bloom Fabrics by Cherry Blossom Studio for Benartex. First, we'll prepare our fabrics by heading to the ironing board and doing some starching.
For the Quilt As You Go process, you really want to have your fabrics nicely starched because we're going to finger press or use a magic seam wand. So I like to give the fabrics at least 2 coats of Starch Savvy. With each coating of the starch, the fabrics get a little bit stiffer, and that makes them easier to work with.
We'll start making our Mix and Match 12 block quilt by cutting our quilt block batting squares.
And we're going to leave about an extra 1/2 inch to inch around each side of the batting. And then what we're going to do is select our backing fabric, and we're going to join these 2. So the back side of the batting to the back side of what is going to be the reverse side of the quilt. We like to use our quilt basting spray, and we like to use that because it's got such a fine mist and it will attach those 2 layers. You always want to spray on the batting, not the fabric, and so we'll just attach that with quilt basting spray. And then if you like a little extra security, you can even sew around the outside edge of your quilt block, and that'll hold things in place.
So you stitch right on that outside solid line,
right on the solid
and set
line.
your machine for a basting stitch and just attach. Once you've glue basted or spray basted and then done that stitching, then it's attached. It's attached at the back.
And we're set for the fun part. So let's bring that back up and take our first.
Let's start with piece 1.
Piece number 1 is our big flower, and we're going to put that right in the center. If you have a glue stick, this is a wonderful tool to use just to keep that first piece in place. Don't be panicky because you see all that purple, because it's going to dry clear. So piece number 1 is now in position, and we're going to bring up piece number 2. These have all been starched and cut to size, so we're ready to go. Piece number 2 goes right sides together against piece number 1. Line them up, and we're going to actually put them right on the placement line here. So these are not sewing lines, they're placement lines. Once we've got right sides together, we're going to sew in a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance through all layers. So through the 2 pieces of fabric, the batting, and the backing. That's why it's called Quilt As You Go, because as you sew, you're actually quilting your block.
You're piecing through the front 2 fabrics together, through the batting, through the back. All through layers are quilted as you go. And this is a great time to use your 1/4 inch quilting foot too.
It is. And then when we've got that done, it's going to look like this. So there's our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now we're going to flip that up, and we're going to finger press that seam open. Now these are nicely starched, but the seam lays pretty flat, but if you like it to get really flat, which I do, we're going to use our magic seam wand. I don't want you to use an iron at this point because that could shrink the batting, but this is a handy little gadget that has a very flat edge on one side, and you can just run that right along there and get that seam nice and flat.
That chisel point really opens up that seam.
And if you want to, you can even heat this up on your iron. So you could put it right against the sew plate of the iron, heat it up. It'll retain that heat for a while and really get the seam nice and flat. Now we're ready for piece 3, which is another rectangle, right sides together here, right on the placement line.
And you're just following the numbers. This
I am.
section says 3.
Just like paint by number, we're going to sew by number. And once we have that 1/4 inch seam allowance, it should flip open and land on the next line, and I've got that done here.
And you've changed the backing fabric, so with every block, you could have a different backing fabric.
You could, and that's going to make the reverse side of the quilt look great too. So 2 is done, and now we have 3 done. And again, you're going to get that seam nice and flat. There's a lot of forgiveness to this process. So if you're a little over the line or a little under the line, don't worry about it, because the next step is you're always going to restart with that placement line. So just look where those 2 land. Actually, it's piece 4 we're working on. Sew and flip, and then we would do the same thing with 5. And those are done here and here. So you can see the block is coming together from the center toward the outside edges. And then we're going to add our triangles, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Let's take a look at that. I've got that done here. And those are sewn and flipped open, and again we want to get those finger pressed nice and flat. Once we have the whole quilt block piece, then we can use an iron, but until then we just want to stick with our magic
right
seam
at your
wand.
sewing machine, stitching these blocks together and then opening right at the sewing machine with the magic seam wand.
And see what I mean here? That's a little short of the line. Don't worry about it, because that next triangle is going to line up right on the line, and when we flip it open it'll be perfect. So here we are. Everything is done and sewn completely. You can run a little stitch around the edge if you don't want those pieces to flap open, which we usually like to do, but your block is now completely quilted. Now we've got to join it to the next block, and this is where the fun comes in, because that used to be a tricky process. But what we are going to use is a relatively new product called Sash-In-A-Dash. It's pre-sewn sashing. So there's actually a stitching line down the center and a casing open on both the right and left side. And what that allows you to do is simply nest your quilt block into the sashing and run a straight stitch.
And you've already done the work for us. At June Tailor, you've already done that stitching, and you buy this by the yard.
You buy it by the yard, and you can buy it in different colors. This is the white version, and your color of your quilts might lend itself better to black or red, navy, gray, or tan. And then if you like, you can even buy the matching binding to go with those. We chose white for this quilt because I think it brings out
really
some of
does.
the lighter colors in the quilt. And we're going to show you some ways that you can actually treat the Sash-In-A-Dash casing. So what we would do is simply open the casing on one side, nest our quilt block inside the casing like this, and then we are going to just run a straight stitch right down here.
So you could glue base
You
this
can glue base
or
pin it if you like, and don't worry again if that glue is purple, because it'll dry clear.
And you're extending beyond the edge a little bit.
I am. We want to just have a nice, at least 1/4 of an inch on top and bottom.
Great tip.
So now we've got that sewn on this block right here. You can see our straight stitching is down here. And then this side is open, and let's ready for our next block.
We have another
so let's
block.
nest that in here like that. All right. And then we can pin or glue base that down, and then just run a straight stitch right down here. You've joined your blocks.
So one block is now 2, a strata of 2, and you're just aligning this top part so that you're on the same plane.
Correct.
With your blocks
Just
as
make
you add
sure
blocks.
exactly that the top of the blocks or the bottom of the blocks are lined up. And then
then
we're
you
going to
stitch
add
that.
we're going to add our third row. So let's take these and open this up and show you. We've done, the backing is so pretty on this,
It
I'll
is.
tell you.
The
Such a
fabric
gorgeous-
collection goes really well together, and using a fabric collection, you know your quilt will come together.
So here's one of our rows completed. Now let's take a look at that Sash-In-A-Dash. We can leave it as is at this point. You could add decorative machine stitches here. You could add the matching fabric. So we selected the pink fabric that you see here.
Right, in your finished quilt, you used the 3/4 inch trim. You could use ribbon, like you said, you could do decorative stitching, but we use the Clover's bias tape maker, the 3/4 inch, and just insert the fabric and press, and you have your beautiful trim that looks so gorgeous on the finished quilt.
It coordinates.
Or you could leave it.
Or you can leave it. And I think what you want to do is, if you're going to add something, now is the point to add it when you have the row done. Add all of that decorative embellishments, because the next process is we're actually going to join the rows.
So if the rows were joined, it's kind of too late at that point. Do it when the rows are just 3 wide.
Because our next step is we're actually going to take this and do just the opposite. We're going to nest this entire row inside our Sash-In-A-Dash like that. And then we will be joining our next set of 3 blocks to form our quilt.
Amazing. It's just straight stitching, capturing that quilt block within the Sash-In-A-Dash, and then stitching.
You could add your pink trim here. And then you can also use the white binding around the quilt, or in our case, we actually use 2 of the fabrics to make a binding, and we use this trimmed
you just
area
stitch 2 fabrics together, long strips.
Stitched.
And then it makes a little piping binding.
It's an inch and 3/4 and an 1.5 on the blue, and you just sew them together. So that extra 1/4 inch is sticking out here. Open it up, fold it over, press it,
when you
and
meet
use
those
that
cut
as your
edges,
binding.
that makes a binding accent.
So our quilt looks so pretty with that piping binding.
It sure does. And that you add last after you assemble all your rows together. So we're making the 12 block quilt, so we have 4 rows. And once we've stitched our rows together, then it's onto the binding.
Then we're going to bind.
Amazing.
But you can see how these blocks look completely different if you turn them in different directions or you put them in a different order than what we did. So there's lots of looks you can get, or again, use them for pillows or use them for table runners. There's just a lot of variety out of the one kit.
It's amazing, Jill. And using a fabric collection, you can make a quilt that is all coordinated, or use your stash and make your quilt scrappy.
Scrappy or mix and match it.
Great technique, Jill, and amazing Sash-In-A-Dash. Thank you for sharing with us today, and I hope to see what you bring next time. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. It was great to be here.
We hope you've enjoyed the Stitch It Sisters project. You'll find this Quilt As You Go 12-block quilt project, along with a limited number of bundle boxes, at stitchitsisters.com. Be sure to tune in again for another Stitch It Sisters sewing adventure. In the meantime, connect with Stitch It Sisters and friends on our social sites. Stitch It Sisters is made possible by Bernina, Clover, Benartex Fabrics, June Tailor, OESD Oklahoma Embroidery Supply and Design, and shopnzp.com.
Bernina, made to create.